How good of news is this Oxford news, particularly for the most vulnerable of our population?
It's another encouraging data point, but I just caution that this is from a phase 2 trial, so it's not comparable to the data that we got from Moderna and Pfizer in the last 2 weeks. And so it's a signal that hopefully we'll see more encouraging results when they report the full phase 3 data sometime in the fourth quarter. But it's just a signal. It is not a full efficacy data set like Pfizer and Moderna.
Okay, good point. But we should be getting the phase 3 or more data later on in the fourth quarter. What's the timeline on any other? Because as you've pointed out, there's not a couple of vaccine candidates. There's, I think, literally more than 100. What is our timeline?
Right. So we obviously have the phase 3 data from the first two, which I just want to point out is very encouraging data, and enough, in my view, that we can have confidence that vaccines will end the pandemic. But in terms of getting data from additional vaccines, we would expect Astra in the fourth quarter, and then J&J sometime in the first quarter, and then a handful of other vaccines probably towards the end of the first quarter or the beginning of the second quarter.
Let me ask you this, Matthew, and I understand you're not a market strategist, okay? You'll leave that to Mike Wilson and his team. I get that. But we're seeing the market boom on this vaccine news. Just as you see it from the vaccine timeline, is the market overestimating the near-term value of a vaccine, or truly can we see an end to this hellscape, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, no, Brian, it's a good question, right? So I don't think the market, from a health crisis standpoint, is ahead of itself. These vaccine data are very strong. I think as good as anybody could have ever expected. And what that means is that even with the first two vaccines, we're in a position to vaccinate broad portions of the population, especially in the US and Western Europe, by the middle of next year. And that will position us to end the pandemic. It doesn't mean that cases won't still continue. It doesn't mean that we still will need to treat people, et cetera. But we will be able to end the pandemic.
Well, that is just fantastic news. And now so much of the attention, Matthew, and hopefully it's not too early, turns to the timeline on delivery, the ethical, ask who gets it first. There is a hugely important meeting coming up kind of from an obscure group on November 24th. Who is the group and what exactly will they be deciding?
Sure. So the CDC has a committee called ACIP. They review a lot of vaccines, but their job for COVID is to list the priority groups in terms of who's going to get the vaccine first and why. I mean, most observers expect that, as you pointed out, high-risk elderly, mainly nursing home patients, would be among that list, as well as hospital workers and first responders. The U.S. probably by the end of the year will have enough doses to vaccinate about 30 million people. And so that's the initial group that we'll be focused on.
The other question, of course, is durability. I saw some news out last night, and at this hour, my brain is kind of mush, so forgive me, that antibody response thankfully looked fairly strong in a number of people who have recovered. In other words, this idea that we're going to get reinfected or immunity seems to be at least very positive that we're not, or we've got some timeline. The question on the vaccine is durability. How long do we need to get shots every 3 months? Can we get 2 shots and then go 5 years? What do we know about some of these candidates and their durability?
Yeah, it's an important question, which we don't have full data on, but I guess a couple comments. So the study that you're referencing looked at the durability of the immune reaction in people who have recovered from the virus. And what we know there is that they had stable antibody levels for about 6 months, but more importantly, the cells in your body that generate those antibodies were also stable. These memory B cells were stable for about 8 months. And so that brings hope that even if your antibody response were to fade, the immune system that you primed would be able to reproduce those antibodies if you were if you got virus again, and so that you would be able to fight it off and be protected. We don't know on the vaccines. I think the first view on. Sorry, go ahead, Brian. Now.
No, just shows wrapping up. What do we know quickly about transport? Do we need negative 100 degrees, expensive, hard to do, or can we do this like in a refrigerator like the Moderna one?
Yeah. So Pfizer requires ultra cold storage, but we're investing in that, and so I'm not really worried about transporting that. Moderna has less onerous requirements and more time in regular refrigeration, but I think in the end we will solve that problem, and I don't think you have to worry very much about that.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.